Picture this, you're laying in your bed, dozing off to sleep at night. As you go to sleep, you're abruptly wakened by people storming into your room. They're heavily armed, they're there to get you. You're scared, you're frantically panicking, you have no idea what's going on. In this scenario, you have schizophrenia, and this is a hallucination that you're experiencing. I'm Corbin, and I'm doing my presentation on schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a mental illness that 2.2 million people in the U.S. have. Origins of schizophrenia have been traced back to ancient Egypt in the Book of Hearts, which is an ancient medical journal. The exact symptoms of schizophrenia are not relevant in the Book of Hearts, but symptoms similar to schizophrenia, such as psychosis, are in the Book of Hearts. Now, the direct account of schizophrenia has been traced back to a book titled Diary of a Madman. This was released in the mid-1800s, and the author describes almost exact symptoms of schizophrenia and psychosis and everything attached to the disorder, which I will get into. The root words for schizophrenia come from the Greek language. The first root word is schizon, which means to split, and the second root word is phren, which means mind. It was first diagnosed by Dr. Eugene Blauler in 1905. He actually coined the term schizophrenia, and he was very important in developing schizophrenia as a treatment and diagnosing what it is. And his theories about schizophrenia are still relevant today. You've had a very good knowledge of everything that a schizophrenic person would go through. Development. Doctors and researchers still don't know the exact causes of schizophrenia. It is generally agreed upon that genetics and environment play important roles in the development of schizophrenia. One theory suggests that neurotransmitters are blocked, or there's a chemical imbalance that causes incorrect signals, causing your brain not to fire correctly, and which in turn leads to all the symptoms attached to schizophrenia. Another theory suggests that children whose immune systems or central nervous systems were compromised during adolescence are predispositioned to developing schizophrenia. That's because the central nervous system and all the nerves attached to it work with your brain, and if it gets damaged or misses certain development during adolescence, it can lead to the onset of schizophrenia. There's a difference between schizophrenia and the early symptoms before full onset schizophrenia. The early symptoms are most recognizable and come into play in the late teens to early 20s. And these symptoms are hard to spot. They're not clear in diagnosable schizophrenia until later, after you develop full-blown schizophrenia. These symptoms include withdrawal from social life, struggles in school or work, failure to maintain personal hygiene, and disorganized thinking. These are difficult to establish as schizophrenia because many people withdraw from social life. It could be many different things. Many people struggle in school or work. It's often a symptom of depression or other things like that, ADD. Failure to maintain personal hygiene is tough to make schizophrenic because some people just don't have very good hygiene and they don't really care about it. And disorganized thinking, that one is usually a key thing into knowing that it's going to be schizophrenia because their brain doesn't necessarily work right and they can't organize things on their own. Now to the full-blown symptoms. Symptoms are in 3 different categories. The first is positive symptoms, next is negative symptoms, and finally cognitive symptoms. These are all categorized differently because they're just different. The first is positive symptoms, and these include delusions, thinking that people are plotting against them or controlling them or constantly spying on them. And these are like the classic cases that you hear about schizophrenics just losing their mind. They go obsessed with their thoughts. And another is hallucinations, and this is seeing things that aren't real. Often have vivid hallucinations, almost like psychedelic. And kind of that picture is the best representation I could find. Just vibrant colors and random things that are actually not in real reality. Next is negative symptoms, and these are withdrawal from social interactions such as with friends and family, lack of energy, motivation, and pleasure, emotionlessness, and inability to express proper emotions. Emotionlessness and lack of energy and motivation and pleasure kind of tying together because they're not getting any emotion from what they're doing regularly. They lose energy and don't have any ambition or motivation to be doing anything. And lack of pleasure is what really sets it apart from just the depressive state, is because they're not searching for purpose, they just can't get pleasure out of whatever they're doing. And inability to express proper emotions, you can see that at, say they're in a setting that's very calm and quiet, they may erupt into anger. Or if they're in a sad setting such as a funeral, they might hysterically laugh. It's just not the proper emotions for what's actually going on. Cognitive symptoms. This includes confused or disorganized thinking, talking and randomly jumping to another topic, difficulty talking, socializing, and communicating, and hyperactivity such as fidgeting. The confused and disorganized thinking is what leads to the difficulty talking and speaking, communicating, because they can't organize their thoughts and make a full thought-out conversation. They often hop from subject to subject, so if you're maybe talking to them about gas prices, and next thing you know they're talking about the baseball game, and you're like, how did we get here? There's no connection between what we're talking about. So, and then hyperactivity, constantly moving their legs or fidgeting back and forth with their hands, being distracted in everyday conversations, stuff like that. Just can't focus, almost like ADD or ADHD. Treatments. The first treatments were like the awful, scary treatments that you hear about in psych wards and asylums, where people were shackled and left in empty cells, and most of the time they're on filth. They often weren't fed enough and come out. They never really got out of asylums. They were often locked in there for life, never really fed properly, things like that. And schizophrenics were one of the main people getting lobotomies. And this is because they had no other idea of how to control their brain, since they didn't know how it worked. And lobotomies would often make their brain not function at all, so they'd just be walking around like zombies. And this helped to work to control people with their violent acts and things like that. But modern treatments have come a long way since then, and modern treatments use medicine and therapy. One without the other does not work, they found out. They need both working in unison. And must be diagnosed by a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist will give them a psychiatric evaluation, determine whether they have schizophrenia or not, and then prescribe medications along with psychotherapy. And the meds that are prescribed to people with schizophrenia are called antipsychotics, and it's pretty self-explanatory. They're drugs that try to eliminate psychosis and things attached to schizophrenia. The new meds work with dopamine and serotonin receptors. Old meds used to just work with dopamine receptors, so when they failed to take their meds, or they just side effect of using the meds, they would fluctuate up and down, and they'd either have no symptoms or they have plethora of symptoms, which is all over the place. But new meds that work with dopamine and serotonin receptors have more stable results. They're not up and down all over the place, so long as they frequently take their meds. Patients often don't see improvement for years, if ever. The most common improvement comes between 20 and 30 years, so it's very hard to see improvement with schizophrenia. There are some misconceptions about schizophrenia. Many people may look at a seemingly crazy person and call them a schizo, but there are a lot of different disorders that may look like a person's crazy. So labeling all people as schizo is really just kind of derogatory, and it's a blanket term that really doesn't benefit treatment or knowledge about schizophrenia. So all disorders are different, and each disorder has different symptoms and different treatments. So giving it a blanket term is calling everybody schizophrenic is just not good. can give negative impacts on the stigma and acceptance of schizophrenia. So similar disorders are, one is DID, or dissociative identity disorder. This used to be called multiple personality disorder, but they changed the name recently. And you may know this one as where people have multiple personalities, and they all have different forms of reality. So one day they may be a completely different person, or within the same day they can change personalities. And this, people often may confuse a person with DID as someone who's with schizophrenia because of the frequent shift in what they see as reality, but they're completely different disorders. Another, but more popular disorder that's in our country is bipolar disorder, and this is much more common than schizophrenia, and it may be confused with schizophrenia because the manic states that people with bipolar disorder go through, they go from depressive states, which they're just constantly down for a long period of time, but before that they have manic states where they're all over the place, full of energy and doing rambunctious, crazy things. So they could be like self-harm type things, such as binge drinking, stuff like that, just stuff they shouldn't be doing. And this could be confused with just schizophrenia, psychosis, people doing random bad things. And the last disorder is depression. This is very popular, and it's hit a lot more recognition lately. And the symptoms of depression are very similar to the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, such like social withdrawal and struggles in work and school. But this one's like, it's less able to say somebody with depression has schizophrenia. But some things about it are very similar. A short video to kind of visualize schizophrenia and what a person with schizophrenia deals with.
Suppose you are chatting with your friend in a park. He or she is talking about a topic you just cannot stand. In fact, you are not even mentally present there, and you are often not in touch with the reality. This may mean you may be suffering from a personality disorder known as schizophrenia. Symptoms include catatonia, delusion, hallucinations, lack of hygiene awareness, and much more. Schizophrenia is a personality disorder, which is more common in males than in females. A person with such a disorder may not care of his or her hygiene needs. For instance, rarely baths, and does not care of his or her dental hygiene. Another symptom, delusion. A person believes on unrealistic thoughts. And hallucinations is when a person sees or hears which does not exist. Another symptom, catatonia, is when the person does repetitive or purposeless overactivity as a result of his or her disturbed mental state. Symptoms of schizophrenia appear when one of the neural circuit situated in the midbrain, called substantia nigra, overproduce neurotransmitter called dopamine and disrupts the balance between secretion of dopamine and acetylcholine. The treatment of schizophrenia includes medication, antipsychotic drugs, such as risperidone, which stops the secretion of dopamine. Physical exercise is necessary to reduce catatonic effects. Still, more studies are needed to understand deeply the mechanism of a disease.
Well, some of the things they said in that video aren't 100% accepted by the World Health Organization, but that is British interpretation of schizophrenia. My mentor was Kim Conrad. She's the owner of Conrad Counseling and Family Centered Services in Macomb, Iowa. She has many different places throughout our area. What she does for a job is she helps children and families who need counseling services. And she attended the Minnesota School of Professional Psychology for her doctoral studies. She helped me review my paper, and she shared her knowledge of mental illnesses, helped me use proper psychiatric terms and vocabulary such as antipsychotic drugs and stuff like that I didn't really know the proper term for. And she shared stories about her education. She talked about how during her doctoral studies she had to get a psychiatric evaluation herself, just kind of understand what it's like that she's going to be doing. So she just shared a little bit what that's like. So, schizophrenia is a difficult and complex disorder that needs a lot more research and attention. It needs more awareness and less of a stigma. People don't know much about it, so they stigmatize it and say that people are just crazy and they're schizos and stuff like that. But they just don't understand what's going on inside their head and that it's a problem. I chose this topic because I think it's just crazy how something can consume your brain or take it over. Something most people are in full control of. A person with schizophrenia has almost no control over it. You can just randomly see things,